Let's talk to William Clouston, who is leader of the Social Democratic Party. William, a very good morning to you.
Morning. Thanks very much for having me on.
Yes, well, I've been meaning to get you on for a while, actually, because we enjoyed our conversation last time so much that I was like, we must get him on again. And then suddenly all hell broke loose and COVID-19 broke out. And I suddenly went, okay, but let's talk to William and see what he makes of it all. Give us your impressions, first of all. Give us your personal experiences and how you think the government is doing.
Well, broadly, I think obviously it's a national emergency, and I think people should be positive. And generally, actually, the public have been positive. You know, you've got 9% of the public broadly supporting the government. It's a time to be constructive and communitarian. And I think some of the...
Would you mind telling some of the members of my profession that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the problem. They haven't covered themselves in glory, but the thing is, the more they do it, the worse it gets, the less respect they'll have from the general public. And that, in the real world, in the hinterlands, in the mainstream Britain, people are getting behind the country and are rallying around. It's been very encouraging, actually, for those of us that want a sort of more communitarian outlook, more unity in the country, and that's been very positive. So some of the criticisms, I mean, they're cheap political points made by people that you'd expect. Funnily enough, I think you're going to have Peter Hitchens on later.
Yeah.
And in a free society, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Peter Hitchens. I think he's a great critic of much of the sort of mindless liberalism we've had in the last 30, 40 years. Funnily enough, I think he has a right and a perfectly decent ability to make the points he's made. I just don't agree with him.
I'm the same. I'm going to be talking to him again today and asking him if his view has changed. I don't think even he would admit that he's not sure in the long run whether he will turn out to be right. He's just really questioning the way it's being done.
And I think it's that side of things, the intellectual side and the questioning side, and we live in a free society. It's very good. I mean, in China, if he said the things, he'd probably be locked up. So, no, I'm fully supportive of that. And I think we should question things, but I think it is a time for unity, and it's a time and no one, in particular, should wish the government to fail.
No.
The NHS to fail. What on earth? I mean, how could people have that attitude in this crisis?
Well, it seems extraordinary to me that there are some people out there who are so critical of the government that they say things like, well, the Nightingale Hospital is empty. What was the point of that? And we go, well, why would you want it to be full?
Yeah, why would you want it? No, it's ridiculous. I mean, the Daily Mirror saying this is where the public will see through it. Where the Daily Mirror blaming Boris Johnson personally, saying he's failed on PPE.
Right.
Sorry, get it right. First, the responsibility for ordering and pandemic supplies and planning lies with the NHS and Public Health England management, which they've done. And they've done. It's not actually for the executive and the leader of the actual country to order it anyway. And he'd have had a pretty hard job doing that from a hospital bed.
Well, exactly right. And the bottom line is that, with every one of these stories that emerges, yes, there are shortages, but there are shortages all over the world, right?
Yeah.
But what there are not is shortages in the vital areas of ICU. I mean, we were told on Friday that this was going to be the weekend that gowns were going to literally run out, right?
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
Yeah.
And now they're going after some shipment which has been delayed, as quite often these things are, as if that's somehow the fault of the government.
Yeah, but you've also got to make the point that compared to what? I mean, a lot of the people, running down the country and saying we're having a worse crisis than any. The facts don't bear that out. There's certainly 4 or 5 countries in Europe that in terms of deaths per million are in a worse position than us. And in any case, that actually doesn't tell you anything, because they may just simply be at a different stage in the virus.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you anything.
I mean, there's plenty of things to be legitimately concerned about and to legitimately ask questions about. For example, I still feel that there's quite a bit of inconsistency. I mean, people have been talking over this weekend particularly about these sort of plane loads of Romanians arriving to pick fruit. Now, I spoke to somebody representing the Farmers Association last week, and I said, how do we know these people are COVID-19 free? He said they've been tested. I'm led to believe there's now 7 flights that have arrived. Yeah. I don't frankly believe that they've all been tested, and I think they should either be quarantined for 14 days or they should have been tested. But the government should be out front of that, telling people why this is happening.
One or the other. No, I agree with that. But again, on the testing's been a thing which the government's been criticised for. Largely, if a pandemic, an emergency like this happens, at the time it happens, you're sort of frozen in time. You're stuck with the planning you've had before, and you're stuck in the short term, you're stuck with the capacity you have in the NHS. So lab testing takes 6 months at least to train someone to be competent in that.
Yes.
You know, and in January, most of the internationally, most of the machines, there are about 8 or 9 different types, were bought up. Many of them were bought up by the Chinese government.
Yes.
So you can't, you know, criticism where criticism is bad. I think, you know, and again, I think the government's Rishi Sunak has done, you know, largely a good job. I think, you know, the furlough scheme, I initially criticised. I thought it was a little bit generous, actually, because I think 80% of wages up to £2,500 per month is generous, particularly when most people are stuck at home and can't spend it. Actually, I mean, in some other jurisdictions in Hong Kong and the United States, Hong Kong was very good at this. The best thing you can do is actually just through the tax and benefit system back money straight into people's bank accounts.
Yes, exactly right. The other thing that I would continue to question is the police activity and the police rules on things, as it were, because I saw pictures yesterday of people out and about in Primrose Hill, which is a very busy park in North London. I've witnessed people walking myself around my street, which is much busier now than it's ever been at the weekends because it's on the river and people go for walks. Cyclists everywhere. You know, meanwhile, you've got police telling people to go home. You know, there's a very mixed message going on there.
It is very difficult. I think one of the difficulties is that they're putting, and it's the same with government policy, actually. It's universal, but we don't live, you know, the environments we live in are very, very different. You know, I think in London, in central London, it was when people were starting to threaten to lock down parks and things. It's not really practical in a city of 8 million people to lock a park.
Right.
You know, you've got to allow people to get out, you know, for their mental health and otherwise. And yet, where I live in the northeast of England, in Northumberland, plenty of space where I live, actually. You know, and so, but you can't actually have two different rules. I can understand the government trying to set a series of rules which apply for the whole country broadly. Right. Common sense is actually what's required.
Well, common sense is what's required, and it's what we deal in here on this radio station, as you know, William.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, you know, why is it not acceptable for somebody to go to a park and sit on a bench nowhere near anybody else, if indeed it's not that busy, and walking into a crowded supermarket and breathing all over the guy next to you?
No, a lot of these things, and again, I think it relies on a bit of tolerance on both sides. If for instance, it's safe to go out for a cycle ride in a rural location once, logically, it's safe to go twice.
Well, right.
So that's the difficulty. But I mean, I think that we've got to be in a situation where people try and literally day to day, sort of within the streets and parks and towns, try and use some common sense to distance if possible. I mean, the problem is that the 2 metre distancing, there's so little science. One of the best interviews I've seen, you know, during this whole crisis was on Unheard. Freddie Sayer interviewed a Swedish epidemiologist, and it was very, very. I think his name was Johan Giesecke, and he said actually a lot of the science that's put out really isn't terribly reliable anyway. I mean, 2 metres, is that right?
Well, exactly right.
Probably.
But interesting, I saw an interview over the weekend with somebody in Sweden who said, you know, while they disagreed with Britain's kind of lockdown, you can't lift it until the time is right, and you have to do it one step at a time, and you can't lift it like, you know, unilaterally, if you like. And
you can't. It's got to be. You've got to get off the ladder rung by rung.
Yes.
I think people understand that. Again, I think broadly speaking, ask yourself whether the government's broad policy is right. The government's policy is to lock down, flatten the curve, increase NHS capacity.
And that's worked, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has worked, and they must have done that. I mean, again, some of the people that have criticised the lockdown, you may be speaking to later, you know, again, would any sensible government, or morally competent government, given what was happening in Italy at the time in Lombardy and Emilia-Romagna, where they were unable to, their capacity wasn't there sufficient to treat people, would any government have said, no, let's just plough forward? They wouldn't have done.
No, of course not. Well, I mean, those people in the Sunday Times being critical of Boris for sort of hiding behind the science, right, are saying basically that he's in the wrong for listening and adhering to the scientific advice that he's been getting.
Yeah, it was very poor article, actually, and I buy the Sunday Times intermittently, but only to read Rod Liddell.
Yes.
A fellow station.
Well, I mean, the Sunday Times is produced in this building, or actually now out of this building, and it's part of the same organisation that we have, so I'm not going to absolutely rip them to shreds, but the bottom line is that,
not the best.
You know, that I've never seen a government reaction to a story as the one that we saw last night, which was incredibly detailed, an incredible rebuttal, like of which I've never ever witnessed.
But I read the piece. The interesting thing about the piece is that at no stage in the piece could they allege, because they couldn't, that the government had ever not taken the scientific advice.
Right.
I mean, the scientific advice changed. You know, the 3 or 4 committees that they have.
Yeah.
It evolved as the...
I could understand if they said that they ignored the government advice, you know, but they didn't ignore the scientific advice, did they?
No, but this is the point, you see. Again, when you speak to Peter maybe later, again, you can say, well, we should have done, could have, should have, like Monday's experts. But the thing is...
maybe they should have gone with a different story yesterday. No, we can look back on that as well. Yeah, I bet they are.
But in Sweden, remember, in Sweden has a different policy. The government has a different policy. Why does it have a different policy? Because its experts have a different opinion.
Sure.
That's why. I mean, if you could find me a modern democracy somewhere where a government ignores its scientific advice and says, actually, I think we're going to do something else.
Right.
Well, that's just not realistic.
Well, one of the things, for example, to look at around the world is the way that they look at masks. You know, in Austria, everyone entering a supermarket has to wear a face mask. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, wearing a face mask is compulsory. In the Czech Republic, you're forbidden to go out in public without wearing a mask. Yeah. Same in France. I mean, the list goes on and on. You can tell I'm doing it in alphabetical order here because I've got a list. Let's pick one at random. Japan. Masks have been widely used by healthy individuals despite absence of official advice to do so. Yeah. Lithuania, wearing a face mask or any other means of covering one's nose and mouth in public places is compulsory.
Yeah.
We say, wear one if you want.
Yeah, no. Well, that's an example of the experts not agreeing, but that's been a problem from the very, very start. And remember that the famous imperial modelling, it gave a range between over 500,000 deaths and 220,000.
Yes,
that's not. That's for a politician. That's not terribly helpful. I mean, and it's not a criticism of the individuals.
No,
I mean it's the fact that models aren't reality.
Right, and that's the problem. I mean, one of the things that I'm going to ask Peter Hitchens later is, are we too reliant on these models? Because the models seem to be driving everything, and most countries in the world are doing roughly the same thing when it comes to a lockdown. But are they being driven by these kind of rather theoretical scientific models which have now been invented by scientists as if they know for sure that the model will be right?
Yeah, no, I think where Peter's possibly going to be proved right. I mean, it could easily be proved right. Is that on the macro picture, on the aggregate picture, that the aggregate cost of the economic turbulence and the destruction of the tax base and businesses going out of business constantly, all of that, the aggregate tail effect of that could, even in lost lives, be greater than the pandemic. Could be. I mean, I would accept that possibility now, but it doesn't get round the fact that a responsible government, can't ignore scientific advice on a lockdown when the NHS doesn't have its capacity. That's the point.
Absolutely right.
So, it might be well. I mean, it's very interesting, but a lot of these things you'll know in 24 months.
Yes. I mean, my attitude is basically this. If we can see some light at the end of the tunnel, if we get to the end of this month and we get into the middle of May and we start to see, say, schools reopening, hairdressers, maybe garden centres, I think people will be far more accepting and the economy will stand a far better chance of keeping going. But if they're going to start to say to people over 70, you can't go out, or they're not going to open pubs until Christmas, I mean, that would be disastrous.
It would be disastrous, completely disastrous. And a lot of the long-term impact on the industry is concerned it's interesting. I mean, I'll give you a very brief example.
Yeah.
The horticulture industry. So all the bedding plants, all the stuff is ready for this season. It's all being put in the skip. Okay, and the suppliers to the horticultural industry, which is worth several £billion in this country, a lot of them will go to the wall. Next year, when they've gone to the wall, they won't be able to supply. They won't be in a position to supply, so you'll suck in imports. And that will damage the balance of payments. So a lot of these things, I mean, I think the government's fully aware of the fact that you've got to step down from the lockdown absolutely as soon as possible. Really?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And the sooner we know about that, the better. But equally, but at the same time, we can't rush into it because that would be foolish.
No, you can't. Absolutely. Well, if you rush into it, there's no point in doing it in the first place.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you really can't. It is a balance thing. And again, they've got to look at the figures, make their best estimate, and have a climb down rung by rung, basically. But looking to the future, a lot of And you've got to, at some stage, a lot of the assumptions that we've had in the last 30, 40 years have turned out to be fairly flaky. I mean, I think certainly peak globalization is probably over as an idea. I think the virus has exposed a lot of weaknesses in liberal economics. I think, there's been a complete indifference on successive governments, not just Conservatives, but certainly New Labour were just as bad. The indifference to what is made by who and where it's made. And you can't have a situation where so many of the world's essential supplies originate in one country. It's ridiculous.
I know, absolutely.
And honestly, I think a lot of our agenda in the Social Democrats has been talking about creating a greater level of national resilience and thinking about the nation in a more positive way. And I think, to be honest, that's got to happen.
Yes. William, a pleasure once again to speak to you. We're out of time, surprisingly. That went very quickly. William Clouston there, leader of the SDP, talking absolute sense